Imagine a house that no one dares to enter. A house that has stood for nearly a century in a quiet Hungarian town, surrounded by overgrown trees and silence that feels heavier than night itself. The house isn't abandoned simply because it's old or falling apart. It's empty because decades ago, something happened there that nobody has been able to explain. A whole family, father, mother, and their 2 children, were found dead inside. Each of them had taken their own life in separate rooms on the exact same night. There were no notes left behind, no signs of struggle, nothing to explain what could drive 4 people, seemingly happy and stable, to such a violent and coordinated end. The police ruled it a bizarre mass suicide, but the locals, they whispered of darker things, of shadows in the hallways, of voices that drove the family to madness, and of restless spirits that never left the property. Over time, the house earned a reputation. It became the kind of place children dared each other to approach, the kind of story parents told their kids to keep them from wandering too far at night. "Stay away from the suicide house," they'd say, "or the family will take you with them." Most people avoided the area entirely. Decades passed, windows shattered, the roof sagged, weeds swallowed the yard. But the stories never faded. They grew, twisted, and passed from one generation to the next, until the house was no longer just a ruin. It was a wound in the middle of town. 2 young men, Michael and George, had heard the stories their whole lives. Unlike most, they weren't scared. If anything, they were fascinated. Both of them were obsessed with urban legends, haunted places, and unsolved mysteries. They'd already explored abandoned factories, underground tunnels, and forgotten graveyards. But this house was different. This house carried a weight no other place did. And so, one autumn evening, Michael looked at George and said, "What if we finally do it? What if we go inside the suicide house and see for ourselves?" George hesitated at first. He'd always talked big, but deep down he wasn't sure if he truly wanted to go through with it. The stories were endless. Neighbors claiming to hear crying at night, travelers reporting shadows in the windows even though the place was locked up, locals swearing that anyone who stepped inside changed afterward. Some got sick. Some had nightmares that never ended. A few even disappeared. But Michael knew how to push. He reminded George of the thrill they'd felt exploring other places, of the rush of proving that scary stories were nothing but myths. And in the end, George gave in. They prepared like they always did. Flashlights, cameras, batteries, and backpacks with water and snacks. But there was something different about this trip. George noticed how Michael's voice carried an edge of excitement he hadn't heard before. Almost like he wasn't just curious, but desperate. That night, clouds gathered over the town. The streets were empty. The air smelled of rain, and the house waited at the end of a narrow road lined with old trees. Its roof leaned, its windows were hollow black eyes, and its door hung crooked on rusted hinges. The 2 young men stood at the gate, staring up at it. Michael grinned nervously. "Well," he said, "this is it." George didn't reply at first. He felt a pressure in his chest, like the air itself was warning him to turn back. He almost suggested they forget it, that they go home and pretend they'd been brave enough. But then Michael was already pushing the gate open, its squeal echoing through the dark street. The yard was a jungle of weeds and thorns. Their flashlights cut weak paths through the shadows. Every step they took felt too loud, crunching on glass and debris. And then they were at the door. Michael pushed it with his shoulder. It groaned open, revealing the black hollow of the house's interior. A wave of cold air rushed out, carrying with it the smell of mold and something else George couldn't place. Something sour, like decay. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, Michael stepped inside, and George had no choice but to follow. The floorboards creaked. Dust swirled in their flashlight beams. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and broken furniture lay in heaps. It was like stepping in another time. George whispered, "This place feels wrong." Michael whispered back, "That's the point." They explored the first floor slowly. The living room still held a collapsed couch, a shattered coffee table, and picture frames with the glass broken. One frame still had a photo inside, a family portrait. It was faded, but you could make out the four faces. They were smiling, dressed in their Sunday best. George leaned closer. Something about the photo unsettled him. The smiles looked forced. The father's eyes were hard, almost angry. The children's grins were wide, but their eyes didn't shine. It was as if someone had told them to smile at the camera and they had obeyed, but their hearts weren't in it. He put the frame back quickly and muttered, "I don't like this." As they moved deeper into the house, the air grew heavier. Their flashlights flickered. At one point, they both swore they heard the faint creak of footsteps above them. They froze, staring at the ceiling. The sound stopped as soon as they went silent. Michael forced a laugh. Probably the wind. But George didn't believe that. Not for a second. The two of them pressed on, their flashlights barely holding back the dark. The hallway stretched ahead, its walls stained with water damage, its wallpaper curling like old skin. Every door they passed seemed to lean inward, as if the house itself were watching them. George tried to keep his voice steady as he whispered, "Do you feel that?" Michael looked back. "Feel what?" "It's colder. And heavier." Michael smirked, though his face was pale in the flashlight's glow. "That's just your nerves." But George knew it wasn't. The air really was heavier. It was like stepping underwater, each breath harder than the last, each step slower. Still, he followed Michael deeper inside. They entered what looked like a dining room. The long table was still there, though warped and collapsing, its legs bowed under years of neglect. Rusted forks and spoons were scattered across the floor, their metal eaten away. And against the far wall hung another photograph, this one larger, in a cracked frame. It showed the same family as before. The father at the head of the table, the mother seated beside him, the two children standing. But unlike the first photo, there were no smiles here. The children's faces were blurred, not from the decay of the photograph, but as if they had moved while the picture was being taken. Their features stretched, smeared, unnatural. George stared at it, unsettled. "That's not right." Michael looked too and frowned. "Maybe the picture got damaged." But George shook his head. "No. It's like they're moving. Look." And for a split second, George swore he saw the faces shift again. He stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. Michael laughed uneasily. "You're scaring yourself." He turned toward the kitchen. "Come on, let's check this out." The kitchen was worse. The cabinets hung open, their doors broken. Dishes littered the floor. A refrigerator stood in the corner, its door rusted shut. When Michael touched it, a sharp crack echoed through the room as the metal shifted slightly. That's when they both heard it. Soft, muffled, almost like humming. George froze. "Tell me you hear that." Michael went still. His eyes darted around the room. "Yeah, I do." The humming seemed to come from somewhere above them. A woman's voice, faint, carrying no tune. Just a low, repetitive hum, like a lullaby without words. Michael whispered, "Upstairs." George grabbed his arm. "No, we don't go up there," but Michael was already pulling away. "That's why we came here." Reluctantly, George followed as they left the kitchen and returned to the staircase. The wooden steps groaned under their weight, each creak echoing through the house. With every step, the humming grew clearer. It wasn't quite singing, but it wasn't random either. It rose and fell in rhythm, steady and deliberate. Halfway up the stairs, George whispered, "This feels wrong." Michael didn't answer. His jaw was set, his eyes locked on the shadowy landing above. At the top, the air was colder still. Their breath clouded in front of them, white mist curling in the glow of their flashlights. The humming stopped the moment they reached the landing. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. They moved cautiously down the hallway. The first door they opened revealed a bedroom with a broken bed frame, the mattress torn open, stuffing spilling onto the floor. On the wall above the bed were deep scratches, as if someone had dragged their fingernails over the plaster again and again. George whispered, "This is a mistake." Michael ignored him and opened the next door. This room was smaller, maybe a child's room. The wallpaper was faded with cartoonish animals, their smiles warped with age. A doll lay in the corner, its porcelain face cracked, one eye missing. George lifted his flashlight toward the doll and froze. Its head was turned toward him. Michael laughed nervously. "It's just the way it fell." George shook his head. "No. I swear it wasn't looking at me before." He bent to touch it, but the moment his fingers brushed its cold surface, a loud crash sounded from the hallway behind them. Both of them jumped, spinning around. The sound had come from the far end of the hall, where the last door was slightly ajar. Michael's voice shook for the first time. "That's where it happened. That's the parents' room." George felt a chill sweep over him. He wanted to turn and run, but Michael was already walking toward the door. Each step echoed like a drumbeat in George's chest. When they reached the door, Michael pushed it open slowly. The room was larger than the others. Heavy curtains hung shredded from the windows. A wardrobe leaned against the wall, its door broken. In the center of the ceiling, a thick hook still jutted out, rusted with age. Beneath it, a dark stain spread across the wooden floorboards. George's throat tightened. "This is where he hung himself." Michael nodded, his face pale. "And his wife, in the closet." The room was freezing. Their flashlights flickered again, both at once. And then, as if on cue, the humming returned. This time, it wasn't distant. It wasn't muffled. It was in the room with them. A woman's voice, low and steady, humming a tune that seemed to crawl under their skin. George's hands shook. "We shouldn't be here. We have to go." Michael raised his camera, his voice trembling. "This is proof. We're not imagining it." But before George could argue, something moved in the corner. A shadow, tall and thin, rising up along the wall. It stretched until it touched the ceiling, then began to crawl slowly toward them. the humming growing louder. George grabbed Michael's arm. "We're leaving." Now, for once, Michael didn't resist. They backed toward the door, their flashlights shaking in their hands. But before they could step out, the door slammed shut with a deafening crack. The humming stopped. And in the silence that followed, they heard it. Breathing. Heavy, labored breathing, as though someone stood right behind them. George turned his head slowly. His flashlight swept across the room and landed on the wardrobe. The broken door was moving. Something inside was pushing against it from the other side. Michael whispered, "Oh my God." The door creaked open just enough for a pale hand to slip out. The pale hand lingered in the crack of the wardrobe door, fingers stiff, the skin stretched thin over bone. Michael and George froze, their lungs seizing as though the very air had turned to ice. Then the hand began to curl, the fingers scratching against the wood, dragging long lines down the surface with a faint, unbearable screech. George's voice cracked. "Open the door! We have to open it." Michael shook his head violently. "No. Are you insane?" But before they could argue, the wardrobe door swung open with sudden force, slamming against the wall. The flashlight beams darted inside, only to reveal emptiness. The wardrobe was hollow, nothing but dust and a torn scrap of fabric. George stumbled backward, shaking his head more. "No! I saw it. You saw it." Michael was pale, but his jaw clenched. "It's this house. It's making us see things." Yet even as he said it, his flashlight caught the fabric on the floor. It wasn't just any cloth. It was a length of rope, frayed and stiff, tied in a knot. George felt bile rise in his throat. That's the rope. That's what he used. Michael lifted his camera with trembling hands, zooming in. His voice was uneven now. "This is proof. This is history staring at us." A sudden sound cut him off. Not humming this time. A whisper. Soft, unintelligible, but close. So close it might have been at their ears. George swatted at the air. "Did you hear that?" Michael nodded, his lips pale. It said something. The whisper came again, rising from everywhere at once. The walls seemed to speak, the floorboards shivering with the sound. Words in Hungarian, sharp and guttural, repeating again and again. George didn't understand the language, but the tone was unmistakable. It was anger. Michael's voice cracked. I think it's telling us to leave." They turned for the door, but it still wouldn't budge. Michael yanked at the handle, slamming his shoulder against the wood, but it held firm as if nailed shut. Then came the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, pacing across the ceiling above them. George backed into the wall, gripping his flashlight so tightly his knuckles went white. "We're trapped." The footsteps grew louder, faster, until suddenly they stopped, right above their heads. Dust sifted down from the ceiling, settling into George's hair. He felt a sob rise in his chest, and then, without warning, the ceiling cracked loudly. A dark stain spread across the wood, and for an instant, George swore he saw the outline of 2 feet dangling down, swinging gently. He screamed and stumbled back, his flashlight beam darting wildly. Michael grabbed him, trying to steady him, but his own breath was ragged. "Don't look! Don't look at it!" The wardrobe door slammed shut again, shaking the floor. And just like that, the lock on the bedroom door clicked open by itself. They didn't hesitate. Michael threw it open and they bolted into the hallway, their footsteps pounding, The corridor stretched longer than before, impossibly long. Each door they passed multiplying like a maze. George gasped. "This isn't right. This isn't the same hallway." Michael didn't answer. He just kept running until they reached the staircase. But when they looked down, their stomachs dropped. The staircase was gone. In its place was a yawning void, a black pit with no bottom, swallowing the light of their flashlights. George staggered back. "We're not in the house anymore." Michael's voice was low, almost a whisper. "We are. But it's not real. It's showing us something." The whispers returned, louder this time, rising like a chorus. Male and female voices, layered on top of one another, chanting in a language neither of them could understand. The walls seemed to pulse with the sound, their peeling wallpaper stretching like flesh. George clutched his head. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" Michael grabbed his arm. "Listen to me. We came here for answers. This is the truth. This is what happened to them." But George wasn't listening. His eyes darted wildly, his flashlight beam swinging across the walls. And then he froze, his body stiff. "Michael," he whispered. "They're here." Michael turned his beam toward the far end of the hallway. His breath caught. Figures stood there. 4 of them. A man, a woman, 2 children. Their bodies gray and lifeless, their heads tilted to the side at unnatural angles. Ropes hung from their necks, dangling into the void beneath them. The children's eyes were black hollows, their faces pale masks of sorrow. The woman's hair hung over her face, but her lips moved in a slow, voiceless chant. The man raised one arm, pointing directly at them. Michael's heart hammered. He could barely breathe. "We have to move." George shook his head violently. "No. No more. We're going to die here." The figures began to move forward, their feet dragging, ropes scraping against the floor. Their heads twisted unnaturally as they advanced, their bodies jerking in broken motions. Michael grabbed George's wrist. "Run!" They bolted down the hallway, but no matter how far they ran, the figures remained just behind them, closing the distance with every step. The walls bent inward, the floor slanting beneath their feet. George stumbled and nearly fell, but Michael pulled him up, his voice hoarse. "Don't stop. Don't you dare stop." Finally, at the end of the hall, a door appeared. A single door, glowing faintly as though lit from within. Michael shoved it open and dragged George inside. They slammed it behind them, both gasping for air. The room was pitch black, their flashlights barely illuminating the space. But they weren't alone. Breathing filled the darkness again, this time all around them. Slow, deep, rattling breaths that seemed to come from every corner. And then a voice, clear, whispering in broken English. "You should not be here." The whisper echoed in the dark, drawn out and venomous, until the silence afterward felt even heavier. Michael and George stood frozen, their flashlights trembling in their hands. The cones of light swept across bare walls and empty corners, but the breathing persisted. George's voice was a broken rasp. "It knows we're here." Michael swallowed hard, forcing his voice to stay steady. "We came for the truth. This is it." As if answering him, the breathing quickened. A wet, rattling inhale. A shuddering exhale. From the shadows, shapes began to form. First the mother. Her figure emerged slowly, pale dress torn, hair cascading in a matted veil across her face. The humming returned with her presence, the same lullaby they'd heard before. But now it carried words. Low and distorted Hungarian phrases that twisted in Michael's ears. Then the father appeared beside her. His eyes were black pits, empty of anything human. A rope dragged across the floor behind him, leaving long scratches in the wood. The children followed, stepping forward in silence. Their faces were wrong, stretched, hollow, their mouths gaping in permanent screams. George whimpered, "No. No, no, no." Michael lifted his camera with shaking hands, desperate to capture it, desperate to prove this wasn't a hallucination. But the moment he looked through the lens, the figures weren't just standing there anymore. They were inches away. He gasped and nearly dropped the camera. When he looked with his eyes, they were still across the room. But through the camera, they were reaching for him, their hands gray and skeletal. Michael staggered back, his chest heaving. "They're in the camera. They're closer. God, they're closer." George clutched his head, rocking back and forth. "We have to leave. We have to leave right now." The air grew thicker, colder, each breath scraping their lungs. The children's mouths opened wider, impossibly wide, until their jaws cracked with the sound of splintering bone. A guttural wail erupted from them, a sound not made for human ears. The room shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. The walls buckled outward, revealing cracks that split wider and wider, until George could see nothing but blackness on the other side. It wasn't just a room anymore. It was collapsing into some void. Michael grabbed George's arm. "Move!" They bolted toward the door they'd entered through, but it was gone. Vanished into the wall as if it had never existed. The father's hollow eyes fixed on them. His lips moved, and though the words were foreign, the meaning burned in Michael's mind like fire. "Join us." Ropes fell from the ceiling, swinging gently as though waiting for necks. The children rushed forward, their bodies jerking unnaturally, their bare feet slapping against the floor. Michael shoved George toward the opposite side of the room. There has to be another way. But as they ran, the floor beneath George split open, a jagged crack tearing across the wood. He stumbled, nearly falling into the void below. Michael caught his arm at the last second, pulling him back with all his strength. The whisper returned, louder now, filling every corner of their minds. "Stay. Stay with us." George's eyes were wild, his voice broken. I can't fight it." Michael shook him violently. "Look at me. You're not giving in. We're leaving, do you hear me?" But George's gaze shifted past him. His flashlight beam flickered across the far wall, where another door had appeared. Unlike the others, this one wasn't rotted or broken. It was pristine, glowing faintly, almost inviting. Michael saw it too. That's it. That has to be it. They sprinted for the door, dodging ropes that swung down like pendulums. The mother's humming rose to a scream, her pale face lifting to reveal a mouth stretched unnaturally wide, black liquid pouring from it. The father lurched forward, dragging his rope behind him, his arm outstretched. The children were faster. They darted across the room, blocking the path, their jaws unhinged, emitting that piercing wail again. Michael roared and swung his flashlight, smashing it into one of the children's faces. The figure shattered like glass, dissolving into smoke. The other child lunged at George, clawing at his chest. George screamed, swinging his camera wildly until it too burst into dust. For a split second, the path was clear. "Go!" Michael shoved George forward, and together they crashed through the glowing door. On the other side, they stumbled into another hallway, this one familiar. It was the same corridor they'd walked earlier, but warped. The walls were too tall, the ceiling too far away. Every step echoed like thunder. Behind them, the door slammed shut, but not before a final whisper slipped through. "We will follow." Michael and George ran without looking back. They didn't care where they were going, as long as it was away. But the hallway didn't end. No matter how far they ran, the same doors, the same wallpaper, the same cracks repeated endlessly, like a loop. George gasped for air, panic clawing at his throat. "We're not getting out. Don't you see? We're stuck here." Michael refused to accept it. He grabbed George by the shoulders. "There's always a way. Houses are built with exits. This one has to have one too." As if mocking him, every door along the hallway slammed open at once. From each room, shadows poured out, crawling across the floor like liquid smoke. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Their forms twisted, writhing, reaching with long skeletal fingers. The sound that followed was deafening. A chorus of screams, wails, whispers, and sobs, all overlapping into one unholy noise. George fell to his knees, covering his ears. "I can't do this. I can't do this." Michael dragged him up, screaming over the noise. "You don't get to quit now. We're almost out. I swear we are." The shadows surged toward them. The hallway buckled, twisting sideways, as if the house itself was trying to shake them off. And then, through the chaos, Michael saw it. A faint glow at the end of the hallway. A door. Real this time? He was sure of it. He pointed, his voice raw. "There. Run." They sprinted, dodging the grasping hands of shadows. The wails grew louder, the walls closing in on them. The floor split open again, revealing the same endless void below. But they kept running, pushing forward with everything they had. The door grew closer, brighter, until it was blinding. And then, just as Michael reached for the handle, the world collapsed into darkness. He was lying on the ground outside, damp grass pressing against his palms. The night sky stretched above him, the stars hazy through drifting clouds. He sat up, gasping, the cool air filling his lungs. Beside him, George lay sprawled, coughing, his face pale and wet with sweat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just breathed, shivering, staring at the crumbling silhouette of the house in the distance. Its windows were black, its frame sagging, as lifeless as it had always been. George finally managed to whisper, We made it out." Michael nodded slowly, though his heart still raced. His flashlight was gone. His camera was gone. But they were alive. The front door of the house creaked in the wind, opening and closing as though mocking them. No light glowed from inside. No voices whispered. It was silent now. Michael pulled George to his feet. "We don't ever come back here. Do you understand me?" George nodded, his entire body trembling. Never. Never. Again. They staggered away, the night swallowing them, each step heavy but real. With every yard they put between themselves and the house, Michael's hope grew stronger. When they finally reached their car at the edge of the dirt road, George slumped against the hood, sobbing quietly. Michael gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, staring ahead, forcing his hands to stop shaking. The engine roared to life. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the narrow road. Neither of them spoke as they drove, the silence heavy. Every shadow along the tree line felt alive, every curve of the road a potential trap. But mile by mile, the house disappeared behind them, swallowed by the forest. George broke the silence at last. His voice was hollow. "We can't tell anyone. No one would believe us." Michael nodded. "They don't need to. We know what we saw." George stared out the window, his reflection pale in the glass. "Do we? Do we really?" Michael opened his mouth to answer, but froze. In the rearview mirror, something shifted. For an instant, he saw 4 figures in the back seat. A man, a woman, 2 children. Their heads tilted, ropes dangling from their necks. Michael blinked, his throat tightening. The back seat was empty. He didn't tell George. He just drove faster, his knuckles bone white against the wheel, praying that if he didn't acknowledge it, it would fade. But as they pulled onto the highway, Michael caught it again. The faintest sound, just beneath the rumble of the tires. A woman humming, the same tune they'd heard in the house. Michael clenched his jaw, refusing to look back, refusing to breathe a word. But deep down, he knew the truth. You don't escape places like that. You only bring them with you.